Welcome to this lecture on marketing opportunities. Today we're going to be looking at general sources of marketing opportunities. We'll also learn the strategic quadrants framework, which gives us some different approaches for marketing opportunities that we want to consider. And we'll also talk about how to assess the attractiveness of market opportunities. So our basic agenda for this presentation is to take a look at the general sources. For that, we'll be using Anzoff's Market Opportunity Matrix. Then we'll learn the Strategic Quadrants Framework, and then we will learn to assess the attractiveness of opportunities that we are considering using two methods, sizing and scoping. Anzoff's Market Opportunity Matrix gives us four general types of opportunities that we can consider for our business. This is a 2x2 matrix that basically is broken out depending on whether the target market that we are considering pursuing would be a new one for our organization or is a present one or current one, and whether the products that we would go to market with are products that we already have and sell or would be new ones. So it's basically old, new, and from this we end up with four options in our 2x2 matrix. The first one is market penetration. Market penetration means that we are going to sell the same things to the same target market, but we are going to try to do so more successfully, or in other words, to penetrate that market more deeply. We can do this in different ways. One thing that we could do would be to find additional uses for the product so that our current customers would need to buy that product more often or buy more of it, even if it's not more often. So if we could have more frequent purchases, more recent purchases, larger purchases, all of that would facilitate a market penetration opportunity. Market penetration does have the highest success rate generally for all of the opportunities that you see here in the market opportunity matrix. It is successful about 75% of the time, and that is thought to be because the companies using this strategy or pursuing opportunities in this particular quadrant already know what they're doing. They have been serving this target audience with the products in question. And so they already have a lot of organizational knowledge about how to succeed. The second quadrant is product development. And you can see here, looking at the matrix, that means that we are continuing to work with a target audience that we have been pursuing before, but we would do so with a new product. And when we say a new product, it could really span from being just a reiteration, an augmentation of a current product that we have, all the way to a true innovation, a true new to the world innovation. Anything in that range would still go into this quadrant if the target audience is the same for us. So again, this would be product development, selling something new to a current market. The third quadrant is market development. This means that we would take the same products that we are already offering in a market, but we'll take them to a new market. And when we say new market, oftentimes what comes to mind is a geographic change, and that might be the case. It may be that we pursue a new region or a new country, but it could be other types of markets as well. For instance, maybe we have been focused on certain vertical industries in the past, and we recognize that something that we've been offering in one vertical would be applicable in another vertical that we haven't served before. So whether it's the type of industry, a different demographic group, a different geographic area, it still would qualify as market development. And in fact, for that matter, it could even be market as defined by benefit sought. For instance, if it turned out that our product had a benefit that we had recognized before. For instance, back in the day, Avon had a a lotion that turned out was very effective as a mosquito repellent. And so when it began selling it for that purpose, that was market development. It was the same product, but they were going after a different target audience that had a different set of needs to those that they had been serving before. And the fourth quadrant is diversification. This means that it is a new target audience for us and a new product. So new. Now, a related diversification is something that it means it's somehow related to the business that we've been in before. But sometimes we pursue unrelated diversifications, and those diversification strategies can be horizontal or vertical. If we are vertical, meaning that we could be diversifying along our supply chain. For instance, Netflix did this when it began to create original programming. It was reverse vertical diversification in that case. Now, I mentioned market penetration is successful 75% of the time. Product development and market development have about a 50-50 success rate. Diversification fails 75% of the time. But the key to when it is successful versus when it tends not to be successful is tied to the organization's skills. When the organization's core competence is the core competence necessary for success in the diversification opportunity, the company tends to be successful. If they don't have the core competence that is required for success, failure tends to occur. So that really is the key, is making sure that whatever it is that the organization is great at doing, whatever skill it is that has helped the organization to be successful in its current markets with current products, if that skill is the same in the diversification opportunity, success is likely. So those are your four basic opportunities. Of course, companies oftentimes do pursue multiple opportunities at once, so it's not like you choose one. You certainly have all four options, and the more complex the organization, the more likely there could be multiple opportunities in play at any point in time. But you would start here to identify what kinds of opportunities you might want to consider. Next, I want to share with you the strategic quadrants framework. This is another 2x2 matrix, and it was created to help organizations identify their strategy so that they could ultimately choose tactics in the marketing mix that would be appropriate for going to market with that purpose in mind. I include it here with market opportunities because it very much is still four types of opportunities that you might choose to pursue as you identify a path for marketing strategy. And so I think it extends nicely upon Anzoff's opportunity matrix and helping us to figure out things that we might be able to do in order to grow and earn additional revenue. And in fact, those two variables are the focus of the strategic quadrants framework. One, we look at where can we get volume, where can we grow, or where can we generate demand from? And two, what is our primary marketing objective as we seek to earn revenues? So we're looking at two key variables, growth and revenue. This is what the strategic quadrants framework looks like. As I mentioned, again, you can see it's a 2x2 matrix. We have source of volume, and the two options for source of volume there are to steal demand or stimulate demand. And then in terms of our marketing objective, we also have two options, one to acquire new customers and two to retain customers. So marketing objectives, acquisition and retention. In terms of where our volume is coming from, we're either stealing demand or stimulating demand. And when we combine those, we have, again, four possible options to pursue with our organization. We're going to go through each of those once I explain to you how to choose which focus you're going to have with each of those variables. So let's start with that source of volume decision. To be able to choose whether you want to steal demand or stimulate demand, you first need to identify the industry in which you compete. And this is a little bit tricky when it comes to the strategic quadrants framework because typically as marketers, we would say to define our industry very broadly. You might remember the classic article by Theodore Levitt on marketing myopia and how he talked about the problem with companies that define themselves very narrowly, and then their entire industry was upended by organizations that they didn't know were competitors coming in. And the classic example is what happened to the train industry in the US. And train companies back then defined themselves as being in the train transportation industry instead of as in the transportation industry more generally. And then competition was able to come from a place that they had not been anticipating and were therefore not prepared for. So typically we say don't be myopic, but in this case we are going to be myopic. We're going to define our industry very narrowly as the set of all companies which have substitutable offerings and compete for the same customers. So again, competing for the same target market and whose offerings could be considered substitutable if there are competitors like that. So that's going to help us to identify those direct competitors. If you are working with a company for which the industry has a very large set of competition, it's very broad, for instance, the automobile industry, then you could also use the value equivalence line to help you narrow in on what are truly substitutable offerings. The value equivalence line is a very simple graph that basically explains that typically with products, the higher the price we pay, the greater the benefits are associated with that higher price. And so if we use that and we map out competitors in any industry, what you'll typically see are clusters of competition at different points along that value line. So for instance, if you're interested in getting a luxury sedan, you're not going to be looking at a Kia Rio, you're only going to be looking at luxury sedans. And if you plotted out automobiles along that value equivalence line, you would see at a certain price point, a certain level of luxury and so on, those brands would all show up in a cluster. So that can also help you to narrow in on this definition of industry as substitutable offerings. Once you've identified those competitors, if they indeed do exist, then you're in a better position to determine whether the opportunity you want to pursue is based on stimulating demand or stealing demand. And recognize that if you stimulate demand, it means you're trying to grow the pie. If you think about all of the sales possible in that particular industry, stimulating demand isn't just for you. It means that you are literally stimulating demand beyond whatever the current demand was industry-wide. And if you steal demand, it means that you are not trying to grow the sales of the industry or grow the value of the industry. Instead, you're just trying to take more of the pie from your competition. So once you know who those direct competitors are and you've thought very narrowly about the substitutable offerings, you will be in a position to decide, do I want to focus on stimulating or do I want to focus on stealing? So the other key part of the strategic quadrants framework is the marketing objective. Are we going to be focused on acquisition or retention? And a lot of times we can tend to focus on acquisition, but it's important for us to remember that it costs a lot more to acquire a customer than it does to retain a customer. And also to the extent that we can successfully retain and build value in our customer relationships over time, we can grow customer lifetime value. And so that's what it means to have a retention focus. So here, again, I want you to decide what's the primary focus, acquisition or retention. And to do this in part, something that you have to do is to figure out who are your customers versus who are your prospects. Now, if someone or some business, if you're B2B, is truly a prospect, they've never done any business with you before, that part might be pretty easy. But sometimes it can be a little confusing how to determine if a customer is a customer if our relationship with them is not very well developed. And I'll give you a little example. I love coffee. I drink a lot of coffee. I typically make my coffee at home and drink it at home. We get our beans shipped to us every week, freshly roasted. My husband is really into coffee, considers himself a coffee connoisseur. So for the most part, I'm not going out to coffee shops. But when I do, I also try to frequent locally owned coffee shops. It's just something that I find important for supporting entrepreneurs and supporting the local economy in that kind of way. So if Starbucks was, if their marketing team was looking at the strategic quadrants framework, how would they define me? Have I ever purchased something from Starbucks? Yes, I have a few times over the years. It's typically when I'm traveling, and typically when I don't perceive other choices around. I'm not at home and I don't know where or can't access a locally owned establishment. So should Starbucks consider me to be a customer or should they consider me to be a prospect? And I would say, based on the way we're defining a customer here for strategic quadrants framework, they should consider me a prospect. And that is because we want to define a customer as someone who habitually patronizes the organization. So habitual patronage would be a customer. And for me, I am not a habitual patron of Starbucks, so they should put me in the prospect category. Now, something else to think about is you have to decide, or your organization would decide, what does it mean to be a habitual patron in the industry within which you compete? And it can vary quite a lot. For instance, we know from customer research that most households will tend to purchase a new vacuum cleaner on average once every 7 years. So if my last vacuum purchase was for a Dyson, should Dyson consider me to be a customer or not? Well, maybe they should, even though that's only one purchase and that's a lot less than the number of times I've purchased from Starbucks. To habitually buy in the vacuum industry is going to happen a lot less frequently than it would be in the coffee shop category of an industry. So you have to define for your organization and for your industry what habitual patronage means. Now, once you've figured that out, then you can think about whether you want to focus your opportunity on acquiring prospects or retaining. And if you are working on retention, then your goal is to find ways to generate additional revenue from those current customers, and additional revenue in such a way that you would maximize customer lifetime value. So those are your two options. Again, you see here on your screen, this is what the strategic quadrants framework looks like. We end up with these 4 options. We can stimulate, acquire, stimulate, retain, steal, acquire, or steal, retain. Now, if we stimulate, acquire, we are acquiring new customers, but they're also new to the industry because we're stimulating new demand here. So when we say stimulate acquire, we are stimulating primary demand, not secondary demand. And just to make sure you remember what those terms mean, secondary demand is demand for a specific brand. Primary demand is demand for a category of product. If you have a grocery list and you've put toilet paper on the grocery list, that means that you were thinking about primary demand. But if you wrote down Charmin, you were thinking about secondary demand. So in this first quadrant, we are focused on primary demand. In the second quadrant, stimulate retain, means those are your current customers, but you're trying to stimulate additional demand from those customers. So again, that's going to be a secondary demand opportunity to pursue there. And you're trying to do things like upsell or drive more volume purchases or drive more margin or all of the above. In the third quadrant, you're focused on steal acquire. So in that case, it's also a secondary demand choice that you're making. Those the target audience in this case are industry customers, but they're not your customers. They're your competitors' customers. So you want to acquire them. They're your prospects. And how are you going to do that? You would steal those customers from your competitors. And then lastly, the fourth quadrant is steal retain. And you might be thinking, well, how is that possible? Because if we're stealing demand from our competition, but if we're retaining our own customers, how does this quadrant even exist? Well, it exists in situations where customers are multi-brand loyal, and or in situations where a certain type of product is part of an ecosystem where you may have compatibility with multiple types of brands. And so I like to think of this quadrant more as like the sharing quadrant. You're sharing these customers with some of your competitors. And the question here is, okay, I'm going to share them, but how can I share less of them? Or how can I get more of the share of wallet from those customers than my competitors? Let's take a look at some examples. Okay, back to the first quadrant. We're in stimulate acquire. And for this example, I'm using 23andMe. 23andMe is a company that offers DNA testing to the general population. I think it costs $99. I have done it. I also bought it for my dad for his birthday present last year. And DNA testing, of course, has been around for a long time, but it has in the past not been available just to the general public. It was typically associated with more specialized medical situations. So 23andMe had to figure out how to stimulate demand for the kind of information we would get from DNA testing. And they had to stimulate that demand because people we didn't have a solution to that problem before. We didn't have an option before, so we might not recognize that as a need. If you think about the steps in the consumer purchase process, step one is that we identify a need that we have. Well, if we've never had a solution for a need, maybe we also never identified that need. So in the stimulate acquire mode, part of the issue is that the company in question has to educate the market about what the need is and what the solution to that need is. And that's what 23andMe has done by emphasizing what we can learn from DNA information. So educating to be able to stimulate primary demand and then also acquiring. This is another example for Quadrant Run. This is for the Gardasil HPV vaccine. This vaccine has been out for a few years now, but when it first came on the market, it really had to do a lot of education, and that is because there had never been, it is the only vaccine for HPV. So No one had ever sought out a vaccine for this, at least not as a general consumer, because one didn't exist. And so it had to educate us about HPV and about how a vaccine could prevent the potential negative impact of HPV, um, and how to go about adopting Gardasil. So, again, a very educational type of marketing message designed to stimulate primary demand for the vaccine while also acquiring those customers. Now let's look at the second quadrant again. This is stimulate demand and retain. So we're stimulating secondary demand or demand for our brand, and we're doing that with current customers. And again, we still have this goal of more volume, more revenue. So it might mean cross-selling, upselling, increasing margin, increasing volume sales. All of those kinds of things fit into possible stimulate retain opportunities. On the lower portion of your screen, I have an image there of the new American Girl Boy doll that was just announced recently. And I think a great example for stimulate retain. People who buy American Girl dolls for their collection or for play. The families I know, at least, whose children have some of these dolls, they buy into the brand and then they continue to buy into the brand. So they may buy multiple dolls, but certainly accessories for the dolls and stories that go along with the dolls and so on. And in this case, this is a way to stimulate some additional demand among those current customers by putting another doll into the mix. So I see it as stimulate retain. It could also have some elements of stimulate acquire, though, because perhaps it allows American Girl to venture into another demographic. If there are boys that are interested in having an American Girl brother doll. I also have Cheerios Snack Mix here on the slide to show you as an example. Cheerios cereal is a very popular cereal. It has been for years and years. It's especially popular among parents who may then also make little snack packs for their kids, for lunches, to take in the car, to have something reasonably healthy and snacky on hand. So Cheerios created a separate snack mix product. So a different packaging, still includes some Cheerios, includes some other things as well, targeting those same families who buy Cheerios cereal, but saying, hey, instead of making up those little Cheerios snack mix packs yourself, just buy ours already ready to go. So this is a great approach to product development to leverage brand loyalty among current customers. Something you have to keep in mind if you follow an approach like this, though, is that there will be some cannibalism to be expected from the original product. So if the parents aren't making their own little snack packs from Cheerios cereal anymore, if they're buying these snack mix bags, that means they're going to go through the cereal less quickly than they would. So there will be some cannibalized sales from that other product. And then the third example I have on the screen is from McCormick Spices. Hate to admit it, but I am guilty of what they're worried about in this particular ad, and that is that I tend to buy spices when I have a recipe that calls for something, and then that spice may sit in my cabinet forever. I think I have spices in my cabinet now that even moved with me from Virginia many years ago. But the spices are not as effective as they age, and so if a certain spice is in your spice rack, if you're not out of it, you may not be buying more of it. You might just say, oh, I already have some of that. So how could McCormick be able to stimulate demand among those current customers? And in this case, what it's done is to try to educate us that even if we haven't used all of the spice may not be as effective as it once was, and we may need to go ahead and throw out the old and bring in a new bottle, and to be able to stimulate sales in that kind of way. In the third category, we are acquiring prospects who are new to us, but they are not new to the industry. So again, we're trying to focus on secondary demand, but we're going to get that demand by stealing it from our competition. And this means that we are trying to get people to switch brands. And Geico has been using a steal strategy really since it went mainstream, since it started using major advertising to be able to reach a broad audience. And you can see here, even in this ad that's on the screen now, do you know how much you could save by switching to Geico? It's even using that word, switch, because that's what they want us to do. We see that a lot also in, recently in the wireless industry with Verizon and T-Mobile and Sprint all trying to get us to switch. And you hear that in their language. You don't hear things like, oh, you're getting your phone for the first time, start your contract with us, or first time you're getting auto insurance, begin here. Instead, what you're hearing is current customers move from them to us, and here's why. And the here's why part is something you have to really think about if you're going after a steal acquire strategy. And that is because the customers have to have a reason to want to switch. Even if they're not particularly happy with their current brand, in many industries, there are barriers to switching in place. It might be, it might take time, or it might be multiple steps, or there might be a contract in place, whatever it is. Companies set up barriers to switching to help keep customers invested in their brand. And so if we're going to try to steal those customers, we have to figure out something we could do with our offer that would get people to switch. Now, what is offered most often? Lower price. We'll give you a better price, switch to us. And even though that is, that could be a good reason, that can work. Lots of companies do that, but you have to be very careful about using price or a sales promotion, a price-oriented sales promotion to get people to switch, because your competitors can just do that right back. And then you end up in this kind of price war trying to steal people back and forth. And we know acquisition costs are high anyway, higher than retaining customers, but certainly if you get into this multi-stage war, stealing customers back and forth, the acquisition costs could skyrocket. And you also want to, be able to measure whether there's any profitability left in that kind of situation. Okay, fourth quadrant, steal, retain. Again, this is the one that I told you I like to think of as sharing. It's like you have a share of wallet of your customers, and so do your competitors, and you want more of that share of wallet. How can you do that? And so in this case, it's it's thinking about, it could be thinking about how to build relationships. It could be thinking about how to inspire more loyalty across the ecosystem. And the images I have here are for computer devices, because that's if you're Apple, you're kind of stuck in the Apple ecosystem, and that's brilliant on their part, because they don't have to worry about someone else stealing across their ecosystem. But if you are a PC user, an Android user, then the competitors in that area all have compatibility with each other, and compatibility is nice for us. It also minimizes brand loyalty across the ecosystem. So how could we pursue getting more share of wallet from our customers, stealing that potential from competitors that our customers like? And so that's what you end up with, the strategic quadrants framework. This is just a summary slide reminding you that stimulate, acquire, and new industry customers, stimulate, retain our current industry customers. There are customers, but we want to figure out how to get more profitability, more revenue, more sales, so on from them. Still acquire our new brand customers, but what would we have to do to get them to switch? And still retain our loyal multi-brand customers. They love us. They also might love our competitors, and we need to get more of that business. Okay, so now we've looked at two 2x2 matrices that each share some thoughts on market opportunities that we could pursue. As we're trying to decide what we're going to pursue, we would analyze, as a first step, analyze how attractive the opportunities are that we're considering. And the two keys that I want to focus on today for that is analyzing attractiveness from a qualitative perspective and from a quantitative perspective. The quantitative perspective means that we are going to assess market size. And to do this, there are 3 TAMs that we would apply. Those are the total available market, the total addressable market, and the total achievable market. And you see here I've got the 3 circles, so that total available market is like the whole marketing universe. Total addressable market would be the percentage of the total available market whose needs we could actually meet. They have some need for what we think we'll offer. They're also qualified in some way. They can pay what we think we might charge, and so on. So we've narrowed that down. And then total achievable market is what is the market share that we could expect to earn if we were to pursue that opportunity. So total available market, the marketing universe, total addressable market, the percentage of the total available market whose needs we could meet and who would be qualified to purchase from us, total achievable market, the percent of the total addressable market that we can actually expect to achieve, actually expect to earn. So the total achievable market recognizes that if we have competition, we're going to end up sharing that total addressable market with those competitors. So what percentage are we going to get versus what other competitors would get? When I work on marketing strategy with organizations, when I'm working in a consultant role, something that I tend to see is that most companies will focus on the total addressable market. And it's important to do that. So I'm really happy that I see that happening in terms of a sizing assessment. However, if you only look at addressable market, it would be very easy to decide to pursue opportunities that ultimately are not going to be profitable for the organization because of the small total achievable market. So, and especially in very competitive areas, you have to not only look at total addressable market, but look at that total achievable market, because ultimately that market share is where your earnings will come from. And so if that number is not expected to be high enough, you still shouldn't move forward, even if the total addressable market is sufficiently large. Now you might be saying, why do you have total available market here? Because typically you want to go to total addressable market because the total addressable market already qualifies prospects in terms of location, where you sell, what you might charge, what they might pay, what they might need, and so on. So it's already refining that market, those market characteristics to be more realistic, and that's a good thing. So why do we list total available market? Well, we do that because it could give you other ideas. It could give you ways to redefine the opportunity to grab more of that total available market, or it might help you to identify another opportunity beyond this one. It can help you find ways of what we would say see blue ocean strategies as opposed to red ocean strategies. So it's still valuable to define all 3. Also, when you are assessing size estimates, you typically what you will do is use access to different variables to be able to make these estimates. And so running through each of these TAM types, you will be able to identify the variables that are relevant and how you could get more specific information on those variables in order to continue to narrow from TAM to TAM to TAM. For instance, let's say that we're thinking about offering a smartphone app, and maybe the total available market would be potentially every human being on Earth. Okay, is that really the number we should go with? No, we need to narrow it. We need to narrow it by people who have a mobile phone, people who have a mobile phone that is also smart, people who have a mobile phone that is also smart, who use apps and maybe who use apps in the language that we're planning to develop our app in, and so on and so on and so on. So you would start figuring out how to narrow through these TAMs, and while also having access to market information that would give you an estimate of size. And the second way that you assess market attractiveness is scoping. So attractiveness, or the attractiveness of opportunities, we do with sizing with scoping. Sizing, we're estimating the 3 TAMs and seeing if there's still size enough market potential there to continue to pursue or evaluate that opportunity. With scoping, you are qualitatively assessing whether that opportunity is attractive. And you see here I have the big OT, opportunities and threats, on your slide, and these are the OTs from a SWOT analysis. So you really already have these. You've done a SWOT, you know what the OTs are, but you're just thinking again about those OTs as they relate to this specific opportunity and determining whether the threats outweigh the opportunities or whether the opportunities outweigh the threats. So if there's more to leverage qualitatively in terms of what's happening with the environment, then you may continue to move forward assessing this market opportunity. If the threats seem too threatening, seem too negative, like there are too many risks out there, too many unknowns, too many difficult things to manage, then you may determine it's not attractive. So again, just a qualitative view using those same OTs that you identified in a SWOT analysis, but thinking just specifically about each specific opportunity you're considering and determining whether based on those OTs it would suggest moving forward or eliminating that opportunity from consideration. So this is our information on market opportunities, and we talked about Anzoff's market opportunity matrix and the 4 general types of opportunities that can be identified from that. We talked about the strategic quadrants framework and those 4 options. And now we've talked about assessing market opportunity using sizing and scoping. Sizing meaning that we get estimates for the 3 TAMs to determine if the size is sufficient to move forward, and scoping using the opportunities and threats from our SWOT analysis to determine if qualitatively that opportunity is worth continuing to consider and pursue.